August 25, 1944. Cherbourg Harbor, Normandy, France. A wrench slipped from Sergeant William Henderson's grease-stained hands as he looked at the long line of trucks forming up. People had said these trucks would fail. They said the design was weak, underpowered, and not fit for modern war. But Henderson saw 6,000 of them getting ready to do the impossible: carry supplies for General Patton's fast-moving Third Army across 400 miles of wrecked French roads. The letters GMC on the hood stood for General Motors Corporation. But to the 75% of drivers who were African American, exhausted before they even started, those letters meant something else. They meant survival. They meant the difference between winning and losing. They meant the lifeline that would keep the Allied armies moving toward Germany. What none of them knew that morning was that the truck the British had dismissed for years earlier would prove more valuable than tanks, more crucial than fighters, and more essential than any other system in the European war. The modest 2.5-ton GMC CCKW, called the Jimmy or the Deuce and a half, was about to become the backbone of the most desperate supply effort the world had seen. The story did not start on the battlefield, but in General Motors' design rooms in 1939, the U.S. Army Ordnance Corps asked for a new medium tactical truck. They needed a 2.5-ton vehicle with 6-wheel drive that could go off-road in any weather. The request sounded simple. The solution was not. GMC's truck and coach division in Pontiac, Michigan, began with commercial parts. They took their Axe series truck and made key changes: a second rear axle for traction and load sharing, all-wheel drive for off-road use, and stronger frame rails for military loads. This first result was the ACKWX 353, the early version of what would become the CCKW. It had a GMC 248 cubic inch inline 6-cylinder engine with 77 horsepower. It weighed about 9,856 pounds empty and measured to 164 inches long, 94.5 inches wide, and 118 inches tall. For commercial use, it was fine. For war, it was doubtful. France ordered 1,000 in late 1939, built at yellow truck and coach. These had closed steel cabs, fixed bedsides, troop seats, and a look that would fit a civilian job site. In short, they were commercial trucks dressed for the military. Then came disaster. In May 1940, German panzer divisions smashed through the Ardennes, bypassed the Maginot Line, and drove deep into France. Despite advanced tanks and defenses, France fell in 6 weeks. The British Expeditionary Force fled at Dunkirk. About 2,000 ACKWX trucks delivered to France were captured and later used by the German army, which admitted they were reliable. The remaining order went to Britain under emergency contracts. The British tested them hard in 1940 and were not impressed. Reports said the wheelbase was too long for European roads. The trucks were hard to maneuver. The 77-horse engine was too weak under load. Acceleration was slow, hill climbing was poor, and mud performance lagged despite 6-wheel drive. They called the design flawed and sent about 1,000 to the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease in 1941. In total, 2,466 ACKWX were built. The British rejection seemed to confirm the fear that American companies, used to wide roads, could not build for Europe's war. GMC engineers took the lesson, add power, refine the chassis, and offer different wheelbases. But the bigger idea remained sound: a 6.6 medium truck made from commercial parts, so it could be built fast and in huge numbers. American engineers saw what the British missed. The goal wasn't a perfect truck. The goal was enough good trucks to overwhelm the enemy with production. In 1941, GMC rolled out the redesigned CCKW. The code meant C for designed in 1941, C for conventional cab, K for all-wheel drive, W for dual rear axles. The improvements were serious but practical. The new GMC 170 cubic inch inline 6 replaced the 248, making 100 for horsepower at 2,750 RPM and 216 foot-pounds of torque at 1,400 RPM. The extra torque changed everything, giving low-end pull for heavy loads and steep hills. There were two wheelbases, the CCKW 350 to 145 inches for short, artillery, and special jobs, and the CCKW 350-160 for inches as the standard cargo version. This flexibility let one basic truck fill many roles across units. The frame used a ladder design with riveted crossmembers simple to build and fix. 3 driven beam axles gave true 6.6 drive. Leaf springs handled the load and motion. Brakes were hydraulic with vacuum assist, better than older systems. Tires were 7.50-20 for ground clearance and load capacity. Early models kept the closed cab, but by July 1943, to save steel, GMC switched to open cabs with canvas tops and removable doors, cutting about 150 pounds of steel per truck, spread over hundreds of thousands of trucks. That saved enough steel for big war needs. Cargo beds also evolved. All steel beds were heavy. Wooden beds warped. Composite beds were a compromise, but not great. The final simple all-steel bed cut waste and lasted. The truck focused on simplicity, reliability, and easy mass production, not fancy performance. The CCKW wouldn't win a race or wow engineers, but it could be built by semi-skilled workers with available materials, and fixed in the field with basic tools by mechanics with little training. Production was centered at Yellow Truck and Coach in Pontiac, Michigan, later joined by Chevrolet's St. Louis plant. At peak, a CCKW rolled off the line every 7 minutes, around the clock. Raw materials entered one end and finished trucks left the other. Sheet metal was stamped, frames built, engines assembled, drivetrains added, all by tens of thousands of workers, many of them women filling jobs while men fought overseas. From 1941 to 1945, GMC produced about 560 to 1,750 CCKWs and variants, with around 518,000 to 519. 0 of the standard all-wheel drive models if you exclude Cabova and non-AWD types. For scale, Germany built about 100,000 total trucks of all kinds in that time. The Soviet Union, even with Lend-Lease help, made fewer than 200,000. Britain's total wartime truck production was dwarfed by this one American model. The CCKW alone nearly matched Axis truck output combined. And it came in dozens of variants: dump trucks, tankers for fuel and water, mobile shops, radio vans, ambulances, wreckers with cranes, and anti-aircraft trucks with quadruple 50 cal guns, yet all shared the same basic chassis and parts, making maintenance and spares simpler. The true test came after D-Day, June 6, 1944, when over 150,000 Allied troops landed in Normandy. By mid-July, over 1 million troops were jammed into a small area, stuck behind their hedgerows thick, ancient earth walls that turned every field into a fort. The U.S. broke through with Operation Cobra on July 25th, and Patton's Third Army burst into open country, moving 50 to 80 miles a day. But fast movement burned huge amounts of fuel. A Sherman tank used about 150 gallons per 100 miles. An armor division with about 250 tanks plus trucks and jeeps needed vast fuel every day. Patton's daily fuel need alone topped 400,000 gallons. First Army needed similar amounts. British and Canadian forces had their own demands. Total Allied fuel use in early August 1940 for past 3 million gallons per day. The Allies had planned for a rapid advance, but not one this fast. Within 2 weeks, U.S. spearheads were to 100 miles from the beaches. Within a month, some were 350 miles out. Every gallon, shell, and ration had to travel over bombed roads through a French rail system the Allies had intentionally wrecked before D-Day to stop German reinforcements. The American Mulberry Harbor had washed out in a storm. The British Mulberry at Romanches worked but could not handle 2 army groups. Cherbourg's port was captured but destroyed and needed months to repair. The Allies faced a crisis. Armored units were running dry, far from supply. First Army rationed ammo. Without a massive, immediate supply push, the advance would stall and Germany would reset its lines. On August 21, 1944, logistics officers met for 36 hours straight and came up with a bold plan: create a dedicated, non-stop express trucking system, like express trains. Every truck would run continuously. 2 one-way roads would carry supplies to the front and empty trucks back. Civilian traffic would be banned. Military police would control intersections to keep convoys rolling. They needed more trucks than any command had, so they pulled trucks from everywhere: artillery prime movers, engineer haulers, ambulances, even infantry transport. Every truck able to move joined. The main vehicle was the GMC CCKW. Tens of thousands were in Europe by then, parked in depots and rear areas. They were gathered for the largest truck convoy operation in history. About 6,000 vehicles were assembled, and at peak, nearly that many were on the road at once. But trucks need drivers, and segregation shaped who drove. The U.S. Army in 1944 was segregated. African American troops served in separate units, mostly in service roles because of racist policies that doubted their abilities. Of about 210,000 black soldiers in the European theater, almost half served in the quartermaster corps when drivers were needed. 17,000 African American soldiers stepped up, joined by roughly 3,000 white soldiers, but units often ran separately. Many drivers were under 24. Some had barely driven before. Training was rushed. They learned to handle 2.5-ton trucks loaded with up to 5 tons through combat zones. They came from farms, factories, colleges, and cities, many from the Jim Crow South. Used to discrimination, yet now carrying the most critical mission of the war. The Red Ball Express began August 25, 1944, named after a railroad symbol for priority freight marked with red balls. Red circles marked the routes and the trucks. To parallel one-way routes linked the ports to forward depots. The northern route took loaded trucks east. The southern route brought empties west, sometimes carrying German prisoners as backhaul. The round trip eventually stretched almost 400 miles as the front moved. Convoys were supposed to be at least 5 trucks with a jeep in front and rear, spaced 60 yards, at 25 miles per hour. In practice, trucks often left as soon as they were loaded. Drivers pulled the speed governors and pushed past the designed 56 miles per hour, sometimes over 60 dangerous in a 1940s truck. The 793rd Military Police Battalion ran traffic control, manning intersections so the convoys never stopped, guiding lost drivers, reporting accidents, and trying to slow down speeders. A full round trip took about 54 hours as the line stretched. 2 drivers per truck were supposed to take turns, but many stayed awake the whole way. The trucks hauled everything: gasoline in 5-gallon cans, ammo in crates, rations, medical supplies, spare parts, and mail. Loading at Cherbourg and other ports ran 24/7. Stevedores many African American could load 5 tons in under 10 minutes. Drivers signed for the load, got route instructions, and rolled out. No delays. Keep them rolling. The drive was harsh and unsafe by any modern standard. Night runs used tiny blackout cut-eye lights that gave almost no light. Drivers followed the dim glow of the truck ahead or memorized the road. Bomb craters, broken bridges, and unmarked detours were common. Getting lost wasted fuel and time. German air raids were rare by late summer, but still possible. Drivers watched the sky for enemy planes and pulled off when warned. Some trucks had ring-mounted .50 cal machine guns, more for comfort than real defense. Landmines were a threat, planted on shoulders and parking spots. Drivers stayed on pavement and parked only in cleared areas. Fatigue was the worst enemy. Men pushed beyond their limits on coffee and willpower. Some took benzodrine, an amphetamine issued to fight sleep, though it could cause poor judgment and accidents. Many stuck to coffee, cigarettes, and grit. Crashes were frequent. Trucks collided, rolled, or hit obstacles. Drivers nodded off. Vehicles slid off in the dark. Some died. Relief drivers were assigned, but exhaustion still caused problems. The trucks suffered too. Running non-stop under heavy loads and high speed wore them out. Engines overheated. Transmissions failed. Clutches burned. Brakes wore in days, not months. Tires blew often on rough roads under heavy loads. Repairs were done in fields, under tarps, or by the roadside, with basic tools and scrounged parts. Oil changes were skipped. Scheduled maintenance was ignored. The only rule was, keep moving. Mechanics improvised gaskets, bypassed broken parts, and cannibalized one truck to fix another. The CCKW's simple design made this possible. A basic mechanic could diagnose and fix with what was at hand. That adaptability was a key strength. By late August, broken trucks littered the route. Some estimates say over 80 were abandoned when they couldn't be quickly fixed. Drivers grabbed spare parts and caught rides. Wreckers worked non-stop but also broke down under strain. At one point, nearly 30% of Red Ball trucks had serious problems that should have stopped them, but they kept going because stopping was not an option. Even with all this, the Red Ball Express beat expectations. Within 5 days it hit peak capacity. On August 29th, 130 truck companies running 5,958 vehicles delivered 12,342 tons in a single day, more than anyone thought possible. Daily deliveries averaged 10,000 to 12,500 tons. About 900 trucks were on the road at any moment. Over 82 days, drivers moved for 112,193 tons and drove 121 million ton-miles, tons times miles. They kept Army groups supplied during one of history's fastest advances. Private James Rookard of the 514th Quartermaster Regiment said they hauled whatever Patton needed: gas, ammo, food, medical supplies straight to the front, back and forth, sometimes under fire, watching for V1 South that dropped like bombs. He remembered trucks exploding, fear of death, and still going when Patton said, "Be there." Corporal Washington Rector of the 3,916th Truck Company explained the racial reality. Discrimination was constant. They were warned not to socialize across race lines. Some white drivers tried to block black drivers from passing, making it dangerous. White MPs sometimes stopped black drivers more often. Mess halls served black drivers last. But most white combat troops appreciated them because they depended on those supplies. On the road, under shells, or when a truck broke down, survival mattered more than skin color, and drivers helped each other despite the rules. Drivers came to respect the CCKW deeply. It could take punishment: overloading, overspeeding, skipped maintenance, and keep going. Yes, transmissions and brakes were weak points, but they could be fixed with basic tools. Complexity would have killed the mission. Simplicity kept it alive. Drivers learned every sound and vibration, knowing what could wait and what needed immediate repair. By September 1944, the route stretched to depots 350 miles from Normandy, making logistics harder. Longer runs lowered daily tonnage per truck. More breakdowns happened. Driver fatigue grew. French railways were slowly being repaired, and Antwerp's port was still closed or damaged. Accidents increased. Ambushes hit some convoys. Theft rose. Fuel, cigarettes, and food leaked to black markets. feeding tension and investigations that rarely found culprits. Still, the trucks rolled because stopping meant units would run out of fuel and ammo. Patton's Third Army consumed supplies at record rates. His tactics worked because the Red Ball Express kept fuel and shells coming. Patton knew logistics made combat possible. Tanks without fuel are statues. Guns without shells are clubs. The Red Ball Express was the engine behind his advance. Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander, also understood this. In October, he thanked the drivers and mechanics for keeping vehicles moving and doing an excellent job. He had learned in North Africa that supply decides what is possible. Red Ball was logistics reduced to essentials. Trucks, drivers, roads, nothing fancy, but absolutely vital. Compared to this, German logistics looked weak. Despite its image, the German army relied heavily on horses over 2.8 million to move supplies. Truck production was limited by steel, fuel, and factory priorities. German armored thrusts often outran their supplies in Russia and North Africa. In France in 1944, Allied air made daytime moves risky, and the resistance hit rail lines. Horse-drawn supply trains could not support mobile war. German units ran short of ammo, food, and especially fuel. Prisoners said American logistics power hurt morale as much as American firepower. By mid-November 1944, Antwerp opened and rail lines improved. Portable pipelines carried gasoline forward. On November 16th, the Red Ball Express ended after 82 days. Drivers went back to units, some to other supply jobs, some to the front as infantry as the army needed replacements. The final numbers: 412,193 tons delivered, 6,000 trucks at peak, 23,000 personnel with 75% African American, routes up to 400 miles one way. Running non-stop teller story planners still study. At the center was the truck. The GMC CCKW, once dismissed by British experts, proved the most valuable tactical vehicle of the war. Its simplicity was its strength. Drivers could fix it with basic tools. Mechanics could keep it going with improvised parts. It could be abused and neglected and still function. Stories spread of engines with cracked blocks wired together, transmissions that should have failed but kept shifting, and trucks limping in on flats and hot engines, unloading, getting quick repairs, and heading back out. Simple and tough meant even damaged trucks could often finish the job. Patton said flatly the 2.5-ton truck was the most valuable weapon. Without supply, an army is just a mob. Colonel John Eisenhower later wrote that without the Red Ball drivers, the advance across France could not have happened. The GMC CCKW kept momentum that prevented Germany from building new defenses, and possibly extended the war into 1946. In December 1944, the idea was tested again when Germany launched the Ardennes offensive. The Battle of the Bulge. The Red Ball was over, but the trucks and drivers were not. They were formed under names like Little Red Ball and White Ball Express, and rushed supplies. And troops in winter, snow, and ice made blackout driving more dangerous. Engines froze. Roads were slick. Drifts blocked routes. Frostbite threatened drivers in open cabs. The Luftwaffe struck harder, yet the trucks rolled. Ammo reached besieged units. Fuel kept tanks moving. Reinforcements sealed the bulge. Combat troops won the battles. But truck drivers kept the lifeline open in one of the worst winters in decades. After Germany surrendered in May 1945, the CCKW kept working. Trucks that crossed France now served in occupation, moving displaced people, delivering food, and carrying troops. Some went to the Pacific, serving in the Philippines and Okinawa. Production continued to 1945. By war's end, GMC had built more CCKWs than Germany built vehicles of all types combined. Total production about 560 to 1,750 exceeded many nations' pre-war truck totals. CCKWs served with allies worldwide under Lend-Lease. Britain, France, the Soviet Union, and Canada all used them. Their simplicity meant long life. The US kept them in service into the 1960s. Even after the M35 series arrived in the 1950s. Many went to foreign militaries into the 1970s and 1980s. Some still run today in collections and museums. The Red Ball drivers, especially the African-American majority, received recognition slowly. Wartime coverage played down race for segregated audiences. The 1950 film Red Ball Express even showed an integration that didn't exist at the time. Many veterans came home to housing, job, and civil rights discrimination. G-Bill benefits helped some, but barriers remained. Over time, especially in the 1980s and 1990s, historians recorded their stories, and museums built exhibits. The National WWII Museum in New Orleans features restored trucks and driver accounts. James Rookard later said he was proud to serve. They were young and scared, but they did what needed doing. Every on-time load proved they deserved respect and were fighting for freedom at home and abroad. Their words show the double reality, fighting for a country that denied them full rights. They risked their lives knowing their performance would help the civil rights struggle. Red Ball became part of the proof that segregation was wrong. The technical lessons shaped U.S. logistics for decades. Continuous convoying, dedicated priority routes, and massive trucking became standard in Korea and Vietnam, even with different terrain. Modern logistics still studies Red Ball planning. The CCKW 66 layout influenced post-war trucks worldwide. The idea of using mass-produced, easy-to-fix vehicles instead of fragile, specialized designs became common. Countries copied or adapted the CCKW. Soviet engineers who got thousands under Lend-Lease studied them, and post-war Soviet trucks, like the ZIL series, showed that influence. They understood the secret was not any single part, but the mix of decent performance, easy maintenance, and huge availability. Modern military trucks are more advanced with computers, automatics, central tire inflation, and armor, but they face the same basic problem: move supplies under fire, while staying simple enough to fix in the field. Every designer since 1945 has worked in the CCKW shadow, trying to match its balance. It proved that excellence isn't always about top specs. The British were right that the early ACKWX was underpowered and awkward. But they were wrong about what mattered. In total war, adequate vehicles built in overwhelming numbers beat better vehicles built in small numbers. Trucks that mechanics can fix with basic tools beat trucks that need factories. Simplicity is a kind of sophistication. The British Army that rejected the ACKWX later used thousands of CCKWs under Lend-Lease, and came to prefer them for long, tough hauls. That long wheelbase gave stability. The engine, once called weak, proved strong and reliable. The simple design meant British mechanics could keep them running with whatever was on hand. One transport officer wrote that these crude American trucks outlasted more refined British ones. In sustained operations, being able to function despite neglect and abuse made the CCKW ideal for the chaos of war logistics. British units learned to pick CCKWs for hard jobs. In the end, the story of the GMC CCKW and the Red Ball Express is about what really wins wars. Not the flashiest tech or the best-looking vehicles. Victory comes from reliable equipment made in huge numbers, operated by people who know the mission matters. The CCKW was not the best truck on paper. It was good enough, and good enough by the hundreds of thousands. Driven by people willing to work to the point of collapse. Supplied the greatest campaign in modern history. The plain 2.5-ton truck scorned in 1940 became the lifeline that fed Allied armies from Normandy to the Elbe, and the drivers 75% African American. Serving a country that denied them basic rights proved that excellence has no color. They kept the wheels turning when any pause could empty a tank's fuel or silence a battery's guns. They drove through exhaustion, fear, and discrimination because the mission mattered more than comfort or recognition. Many returned to the same prejudice they had left, but they had proved something vital: that black soldiers could run complex, critical missions under the hardest conditions. That segregation was a lie. That skill and resolve are not defined by skin. Red Ball became part of the evidence that helped break Jim Crow in the years after the war. On August 25, 1944, Sergeant Henderson tightened the last bolt on a CCKW engine and watched the truck join the line. The British had called these trucks worthless. He knew better. He knew that in the next 82 days, these inadequate vehicles would make history not through drama or fancy tech, but through steady, stubborn, unglamorous work, hauling supplies, keeping armies moving, winning the war. The GMC CCKW, the Jimmy, the Deuce and a half. The truck the British had rejected turned out to be America's secret weapon, the lifeline of the Red Ball Express, and proof that the most valuable things are often the simplest ones, run by people determined to finish the job no matter what.